Well,
lived
that
on
was
tulip bulbs.
1944. That's when things became really rough. As a matter of fact, just before the American planes started dropping the Swedish bread and crackers, we were eating tulip bulbs. That's all that was left to eat. And Mother would, we would all sit at the table and cut the tulip bulbs open to take the flower out, because the flower is poisonous. The rest you
Oh, I
can
didn't
eat.
know that. Okay.
The rest you can eat. So we had to pick the flower out of the tulip bulb, and they'd be sliced, and we'd fry them, and we'd put them on trays and bake them, or we'd grind them up, and Mother would mix it with bread, with a little bit of flour to make bread. So there were various ways to use the tulip bulb flower.
Well, you asked me during the break about sort of why we're doing this and how we're doing it. And one of the, I don't believe this, why I'm getting laryngitis soon. One of the things that happened was 2 weeks ago, we had a fellow named Kenji Okuda here. He was 20 years old when war broke out in Pearl Harbor for the United States. And 7 hours or 8 hours after Pearl Harbor, the FBI were at his house arresting his father because they were taking all the Japanese off the West Coast. David Suzuki told me a wonderful story about what happened in Vancouver. And getting these stories out for people, I think, is important.
It's good to record this type of information, because today young people have no idea what happened back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. They were different times.
It was a different time.
Very different times.
Different time. We weren't afraid of
In
it.
some respects, they were good times, because I think we had a greater appreciation for what it is we had. There wasn't always, such as we see it today, the demand and the desire for more and more and more. So they were good times in that regard. But they were also times of need for a lot of people.
What brought you to Canada then? How did you end up in Canada? There's eight of you,
well, of
eight
course,
of you plus your mother, I take it.
Father was in Canada, Mother with the children in Holland, and a sad experience for Mother just before the war ended. As a matter of fact, the war had just ended when my youngest brother, he was at the time 7 years of age, had obviously stepped in some horse manure, at least that's what they thought, and he developed tetanus. The hospitals were nothing back in those days, particularly in Holland at the end of the war. There was nothing left in the hospital. Even the aspirins had been taken by the Nazis for their use. So they took everything that was in a hospital. There was little or nothing they could do. Well, there was nothing they could do for tetanus, certainly. So my little brother died after 3 days. That was sad, because Father had only seen him as a little baby when he left to go to Canada.
Sure.
He came back in 1945 after the war, as soon as he could safely cross the ocean.
Get back across, yeah.
And he brought with him sweet Caporal cigarettes, which were like gold. He brought back with him Prem and Spam and crackers and cheese. So it was a big celebration when he arrived back in the village. He was a big man, a popular fellow, well liked by everyone, because he had time for, regardless of who it was.
Well, I know another guy
Nothing
named
mattered.
Vander Zalm that's like that too.
A little bit, probably take a little bit after my father, but he was very good at it, no doubt. It came natural, and I guess it does with me. We like people.
I've
so that
watched
helps.
you, and we're just going to digress for the audience, because I've watched you in restaurants and so on. And you remember you and Chris Delaney and I were down in a white spot one time. And Chris, of course, is running as a Conservative candidate in the election.
That's right.
Right now up in the Okanagan. Isn't the Okanagan your wife's stomping grounds?
I met my sweetheart in Kelowna back
Yeah.
in 1950, better be careful, 53 or 4, I guess it was. I'm supposed to remember. It's about that.
Took you a couple of years,
Yeah.
okay. Anyway. But somebody came up to you and started something about how they hadn't seen you in years, and you sort of looked at them and said, John Porta Potty's Chilliwack Fair, 1966. Do you remember doing that?
You know, I often comment now, back when I was in politics, particularly early politics, I was a councillor in Surrey, I was the mayor of Surrey, I became the MLA in Surrey, I was a minister 3 times, 3, you know, municipal affairs and transit, social services first of all, and then education.
Social services was a little tough part for
It
you.
was fun. It was probably one of the better ministries. I enjoyed it. So, but I remember back then, I could remember names, places, times that I met people and where I met them. And I often comment on that now because I think since leaving politics, I've sort of decided within somehow that I wouldn't need to do all of that. So I'm nowhere near as good with names now as what I was back then. I was really good back then, yeah.
I can never. This fellow was so surprised. I mean, he was like, "Wow!" You know, he was going to sort of remind you of when he met you, and you reminded him. And it was a knack, and seen you do that several times, because you are sort of an idol to me. And
Well, thank you.
Well, I remember at a Commonwealth Hotel in Saskatoon one time, you were there for a Prairie Province's Premier's meeting.
That's right.
And you didn't even see me, I don't think. But I was walking through the lobby, and there's Bill Vander Zalm with a bloody name tag on. And I was pretty full of myself at the time, and I never wore a name tag. First, you don't know who I am, what the hell. Bill Vander Zalm, Premier of British Columbia, is at a Premier's conference. He's got a bloody name tag on. I've worn a name tag everywhere I've gone since.
Really? But that was Saskatoon. Probably back home, the need wasn't there, but Saskatoon, a little bit different.
You were at a Premier's conference. You were sitting at the table. You had a.
I know.
You were wearing a name tag, and I
how it
always
was.
thought. And I have another story that's going to sort of point fun at an old friend of ours, and that was Gary Bannerman. You remember when Gary Bannerman moved into West Vancouver and he had his housewarming party?
Yeah.
And you showed up there. And
that's right.
You invited him. I mean, Richard Pitt's operating this over here, and Richard Pitt knows Gary very, very well as well. And Richard, I'll tell you the story because Bill invited Gary to go to an Oktoberfest. And
oh yeah,
remember the Oktoberfest?
Yes,
you invited
yes.
him to an Oktoberfest, and he said, "Oh, remember." And Gary never went anywhere, and he said, "Oh, it's too far to go." And you said, "Funny, it's just down the road from my place. It's about the same distance from here to there as it is from me to come here." And he went.
Yeah.
And it was just such a wonderful.
I remember the Oktoberfest. We had fun. At one time, I used to go to every Oktoberfest, I guess. It was fun. Lively, lots of fun. They don't have so many of them anymore. But it was great fun.
No, you're famous for something. And the thing you're famous for is give them a shovel. You do remember that saying, do you? And I just thought, this is an electric shovel.
I like that.
Yeah, it's an electric shovel.
Yeah.
And so I just brought this out as a symbol because, you know, everybody should have an
I can
electric
still
shovel.
use the ordinary shovel. I don't yet need an electric shovel.
Don't need an electric shovel.
So I'm doing fine. But the shovel, you know what? People still remind me all the time about the shovel. No matter where I go, people tend to remember. Even if I'm in California visiting or having a holiday, I'll see people there. My voice gives me away. If I'm someplace and I speak out, they tend to hear me and recognize me. Well, hopefully they recognize me by looking as well. But anyway, the first thing they say is, "Hey, we sure liked your shovel statement." They still say that. People love
Well, we did.
the
We all
shovel
loved
statement. I guess not so much. It wasn't intended to be a nasty comment for the people on welfare, but it certainly, I think, carried a message that a lot of people could quickly relate to, even the people on welfare. So anyway, yeah, what I said is for those in need, if they're in need, we're here to help them. If they're seniors, elderly people, and they need help, we're probably not giving them enough. And we're certainly not doing enough for the handicapped people. We need to do a lot more. But if they're able to work and they refuse to work, they better pick up a shovel or I'll give them a shovel. That was the statement.
It was so
And you
well
know
done.
what? It was kind of, it was funny because it was my first ministry. Bill Bennett was the premier. And it was It was the time when we were inaugurated as to our offices, and there was a reception at the Union Club in Victoria. And all of the publicity should have gone to Bill Bennett. Obviously, it was his moment, but the shovel statement killed it all.